I've always really liked the artwork of Boris Vallejo and Frank Frazetta, and they have a very distinctive fantasy look to their artwork, and I wanted to be able to duplicate that effect with Photoshop and my own photo manipulations. And so after a lot of hours and trial and error, I finally came up with a technique that I think looks really good and closely mimics the look and feel that you get with these Boris paintings. And I wanted just to show you a couple of them just so you get the idea of the look we're after. So you'll notice that in his paintings, you have kind of this green cast that you see throughout the images. And then the same thing with kind of these reds that you see throughout here, and a yellow tone that is pervasive in the paintings. And here's another one where you really see him emphasize those green tones heavily in this particular painting. But again, you still see those reds and yellows that show up. And then just this last one here, same thing, where again you see that green, the red. This has a little titch of blue in it as well. But overall, that's the look that we are going for. So this is our final look that we're going to achieve of Wolverine with the Boris effect. And so we're going to start with this, and we're going to end here. And you can see that is a very dramatic change over our initial image that we're starting with. A little bit about this image. This is a 1/6 scale TB League fully posable model with a Wolverine head sculpt that I photographed, and I've just cut it out. And I will make this available to you to download if you want to follow along with this video. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a selective color, and we're just going to add some effects to start moving the tonality of this to the tonality more like a typical Boris painting has. So I'm going to go to the reds here, and I'm going to go down to about 13, 14 here, down around 7 here. We're going to bump up the yellows to around 13, and the blacks up a fair amount, up to about 17. Okay, then we're going to go to the yellows, and we're going to bump the cyan up to about 18, 19. The magenta up to around 22. Yellow up to about 13, 14, and the blacks up around 19, 20. Okay, we go down to the neutrals, and we're going to reduce this down to minus 11, 12, 0, bump this up around 7, the blacks up around 7. And the same thing here with the blacks. Just going to bump up these blacks a bit. 4, 5, 5, and 11. And that just starts adding a little bit of color and starting to add colors into the highlights and shadows that move it towards that coloration that I want to get that Boris effect. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a gradient map. And the colors I'm going to use. So if you double click on that, it will bring this up. And if you double click on this, you can set your color. And the first color I want is 331004. And then set the other color to DF8961. We'll hit OK. And I'm going to set this to overlay. And then I'm going to drop the opacity down to around 62%. So that starts to give us that really nice coloring there. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a black and white layer. Again, I'm going to set the blending mode to overlay. We're going to set the reds up to about 62. The yellows to about 57. And then the rest of those just the way they are presently. And so this kind of starts to bring out some contrast and some add some dimensionality to the overall look and gives it a little bit of that dodge and burn feel, and again moves us closer to that overall image that we want with getting that Boris effect. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually click here, and I'm going to hit Shift click, and I'm going to go to Control Z, and I'm going to group all of those, call this model, and then I'm going to convert it into a smart object. So what that will allow me to do is I can, if I want to, I can double click on this filter icon here, and that will allow me to adjust any of the things that I've done up to this point. But now I can add filters to the overall group here. And so that's why I did that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go up to filter. We're going to go to camera raw filter. And we're going to go here to color grading. And I'm going to set the midtones here to about 12, 15 if we're going by clock coordinates. The shadows to about 3:30, and the highlights to about 2 o'clock. So something like that. Okay, and again, this just is bringing that color closer and closer to what I want as far as the effect we're going for looks like. So that now is our foundation. We've got the foundational colors that I'm going for. And now this is where we really get into the meat of how we create this effect. And I tried all kinds of filters, third-party filters, camera raw filters, Photoshop filters, seeing if I could add that coloring and that casting to the highlights and shadows, and never could find anything that I was happy with. And then one day I had an epiphany of, well, maybe what I need to do is I need to actually paint the image myself. And so that's the technique that I came up with that creates that look that I was after. And it's fairly simple to do. And I will start showing you how to do that right now. So I'm just going to add a new layer. I'm going to call it red. And I'm going to make sure I've got my brush is soft. Double click on here. I'm going to set my red color. And that's my red color that I'm after. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm basically just going to color where some of the heavier shadows are in the image. So I'm just going to go look through this, see where those heavier shadows are, and I'm just going to paint those red. And and I'm going to use my bracket key to make this bigger and smaller, and I'm going to trace anywhere that there's a darker shadow area. I'm going to color with the red, and then that will emphasize the reds in the shadow area. Add a little bit to the hand here. Just going to trace all of these stomach muscles. Come down the back. Trace through these pectoral muscles. So this doesn't have to be overly precise. Just keeping it more with where there's some darker highlights, and I want to do the pants to add some of that tonality to the pant area as well as the rest of the image goes. Okay, maybe we'll highlight this a little bit more, a little there. Maybe add a line there. Split that up, maybe bring that there. Okay, so that's now our reds. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to add a layer. I'm going to call this green. And then the green I'm after is 37372C. And with this, I'm going to more or less parallel the red with a little, but I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap, but I'm going to kind of put it in the same places that I did with the red, and then maybe add a couple other places that isn't necessarily right parallel to the reds. And again, I'm just not worrying about being too precise here. I just don't want to overlay the colors. That's kind of the main thing that I want to be careful of, is that I make sure I leave a bit of a gap and don't paint over the colors. And then again, I'll come down here on the pants. Just add some of this coloring down here as well, just so we're carrying that overall color throughout the image to make everything look cohesive. Just giving this one last look over, see if I've missed anything. I think I'll add a little more green right here. Maybe add a little green there. Okay. And I'm happy with that. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of blue. And there's just a touch of blue that I add throughout this, just to give it that kind of blue tonality that I see in Boris's look. So the color I'm using is 1C8279. And again, this is just going to be just a hint of that here and there. Not a lot, just a little hint of that here and there. Probably something about like that. Okay, and then I'm going to add the yellow. And the color I'm adding is ECBF43. And in order to get this where I want it, I'm going to add a curve adjustment layer, jack up that highlights a lot, and then I'm going to right click and go to blending options, and I'm going to blend this so that just the highlights show through. So this tells me where the heavier highlights are in the image. And so you can, this has a stronger effect if you leave these triangles together, but you can break them apart by hitting Alt, and then this gives a more subtle approach. And so I'm going to break those in half so I can have a little more ability to fine-tune where those highlights are. Okay, that gives me a pretty good idea. Check that up a little more. Okay, so I'm going to go back down to my yellows, and I'm just going to paint where I see those heavier highlights in the image. Again, I'm just using my bracket keys to make that brush size bigger and smaller. Okay. Right there. Got one. Okay, so I like that. So I'm going to add a white to it in a minute, but I'm going to finish with these colors first. So I'm going to just hide those colors. I'm going to come down and select my red, and I'm going to convert that to a smart filter because I'm going to blur it, and I want the ability to be able to adjust that blur at any given time. So now I'm going to go down to filter and Gaussian blur. And what I found for my taste is that right around 35, 36 tends to give me the look I like for the reds, the greens. And so I'm just going to leave it at that. But if you want it more dramatic, you can just kind of drop the how much it blurs, and that will impact just how dramatic this look is. But I like it right around 36 pixels. So I'm going to do the same thing with the green. I'm going to come up here to filter, convert to smart filters, filter blur, Gaussian blur should still be set to 36. And that's what I want it to be. Blues, same thing. I'm going to set it, I'm going to convert it to a smart object, filter, Gaussian blur, and I kind of tend to bump this up a bit, maybe up to about 45, just because I don't want it to be too overpowering. And then the yellow, again, convert to yellow, filter, convert to smart filters, filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and again I'm going to leave that up around 45. And then I'm going to do one additional thing to this to make sure that that yellow is in highlights, is I'm going to go to blending options, and I'm going to use the blend if here to make sure that those highlights are sticking to where the highlights are in the underlying image. And so you can see I can basically remove all of that. If I just slide this completely over, it just completely hides that yellow. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit my Alt key and separate that and just come over a bit just to make sure that those yellows are staying where I want them to be. And that looks pretty good to me. Okay, now what I'm going to do is my last color is I'm going to do white. I'm going to hit D. That changes this to black and white. And then I hit X. We'll swap these back and forth. So on a white, I'm going to bring my curves up again. I'm going to bring up my blending options. And I'm really going to adjust this so it shows where the most dramatic highlights are and paint those white. So I kind of do it a little more globally with the yellow and then more precision with the, and I'm not painting, there we go. And then more targeted with the white, and just hit the very, very strong highlights to accentuate this heavier shadow, or heavier highlight rather. And I kind of like to do a bit down the muscles just to give them that kind of more dodge and burn feel, which emphasizes the muscles, makes the overall image have more dimensions. Okay, that looks like I've right there a little bit. Here, down this thumb. Okay, then I'm going to turn off my curves layer. Same thing I've done with the other ones. I'm going to go to filter, convert it to a smart filter. Filter blur, Gaussian blur. And I'm going to move that down into that 36 because I kind of want that to pop. But again, I'm going to go to my blending options, and I'm going to just make sure that that paint is in where the highlights are. Okay, so that gives us our Boris effect, and I am going to do one more adjustment where I'm going to desaturate it down to around 22. Okay. So that really kind of completes the overall look. I'm going to finish it off by creating a stamp. I'm going to turn that off. And what that does is it's just going to blend or copy all of the layers up to a single layer. And this is where I do just my final adjustments. And I'm actually going to use the Knit Collection Color Effects Pro to finish this off with. But there's a lot of filters built into Photoshop and Camera Raw that you can achieve a similar effect. And I have a tutorial out there called add dramatic, sorry, can't think of what it's called. Um, Add dramatic detail to your images that will get you similar to what I'm going to achieve here with the knit collection. So I'm going to come up here to filter. I'm going to go to knit collection, color effects pro. I'm going to hit clarity bump, which just adds a little more contrast overall to the image. And then I'm going to add one more filter as soon as this one's done. I'm going to go filter, knit collection, color effects pro. And I'm going to go down here to, for detail, I'm going to add that, and that at 100% is going to be too strong of an effect for this image. So I am going to drop the opacity and take that up to about 25%, just to bring in some of that sharpness and detail back into the image. So the background for this is super simple. I just brought in kind of a muted cloud background, and then a texture. Let me show you what that looks like. This texture normally is just, I think this might be some kind of a paper texture. And then I just set it to overlay, just so it gives kind of a more dramatic look to that background. So there you have it. There's our Wolverine Boris effect, photo manipulation. I hope you've enjoyed it, and that you can use this effect in some of your own artwork. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate it.